In other words, f vegetarians, as vegans say. Just kidding, maybe. Hey, what is going on, guys? So today we're going to try to answer the question of what is the best kind of vegan activism? This is a question that I think many vegans, and funnily enough, non-vegans, can be very overconfident in answering. I say this because a question like this is very complex and requires a lot of empirical data if we're going to be answering it in, of course, an evidence-based way. And empirical data, by the way, which at the moment we largely just don't have. At the end of this video, I will be touching a little bit on this study that I found interesting. However, it should be made clear that empirical data, which helps answer the question you see in the title of this video, is largely in its infancy. I think without data, we could establish some things we would like to see in the form of activism we would call the most effective or the best type of vegan activism. Now, first, let's talk about what we mean when we say the best kind of vegan activism. Some may view the best type of vegan activism to just be the kind of vegan activism that has the highest likelihood of convincing people to adopt veganism. Some may view the best type of vegan activism to be not only the kind of activism that, has the highest likelihood of making people go vegan, but also most successfully gives people very good reasons which can be defended for why they're going vegan. In other words, they go vegan, but they can easily defend why they're vegan when challenged on it. I seem to take the latter view for what the best kind of vegan activism would look like, especially given how often vegans are challenged after going vegan, or for simply just existing as a vegan. So for example, let's say we had some empirical data to suggest that showing people slaughter footage was a mode of activism with the highest likelihood of going vegan, but this mode alone doesn't give people the ability to defend their views when challenged in specific ways. Imagine somebody sees slaughter footage and decides to go vegan, and when asked why they're vegan, all they say is, I don't want animals to die for my existence. And they saw how animals die for their existence by watching slaughter footage. And now let's imagine that some meat eater or anti-vegan brings up crop deaths to this person, showing them that animals die for them to exist, even still living the lifestyle of a vegan. If this new vegan is not equipped to handle this kind of criticism or challenge from meat eaters and anti-vegans, they may drop the lifestyle altogether, or at the very least, slowly lose confidence in the position and slowly drop it. Let's now imagine there was data to suggest that lying to people about something specific, which pertains to veganism, was the most effective way of convincing them to go vegan. For example, let's say we had data to suggest that telling people that if you eat meat, you will get cancer because it's wrong to eat animals was a style of vegan activism that was most likely to convince people to go vegan. It's very clear that the issue here is that although the method convinces people to go vegan, it convinces them to go vegan on very shaky and easily refutable grounds, which presumably increases the likelihood of them dropping the lifestyle at some point altogether, especially when challenged on their reasons for committing to such a lifestyle. So at least in my view, it seems the best form of vegan activism is going to be the form which has the highest likelihood of not only convincing people to adopt veganism, but also supplying people with the necessary logic and reasoning to sufficiently defend their reasons for being vegan, in turn increasing the likelihood of them staying vegan long term, as well as when they're being challenged. Because of course we want people to go vegan, but we also want them to stay vegan after the fact. Now, I said at the beginning of the video that, in my view, people are a bit too confident when trying to answer the question of which is the best form of vegan activism. I personally have some strong intuitions about what the best form of vegan activism is, but those are just that, strong intuitions. My intuitions are not from a robust study testing multiple types of vegan activism on a properly randomized subset of the population, which has been replicated several times, and other robust and similarly designed studies. These intuitions of mine likely come from a multitude of things. For example, what convinced me to go vegan, what I've seen most commonly convinces others to go vegan in my vegan outreach on the streets in the past. Basically, my uncontrolled anecdotal experience. As much as I feel as though my most preferred form of activism is the best form of vegan activism, my intuition and personal experience deploying it is not enough to extrapolate onto the overall population. Many people, including myself, will say things like, well, people are different and people respond differently to different kinds of vegan activism. I think most vegans hold this intuition, and it seems to be true. Some vegans may be more easily convinced by something like name the trait, some by slaughter footage, some by vegan gains yelling at you, some by a combination of all three of these things. And while I am of the belief that different people respond differently to different types of vegan activism, this belief is not incompatible with the belief that there is such a thing as a mode of vegan activism which best convinces or, most effectively convinces people to go vegan and stay vegan with good reasons. Both of these things can be true at the same time. And while we don't have good evidence of the latter at the moment, which arguably is the most important thing to have evidence for with the goal of trying to convince as many people to go vegan as possible, we do have evidence of the former. I don't think evidence really needs to be cited here, as a brief look through social media and vegan spaces will show you multiple people explaining what convinced them to go vegan, whether it was Name the Trait, Joey Carbstrong style of activism, Earthling Ed style, or a documentary. In fact, I'm sure there will be some people in the comment section of this video explaining what exactly made them go vegan. Now, I know the title of this video is something like, what is the best form of vegan activism? And if you've been paying attention, you'll see that I haven't actually laid out what it is. That is because, given the current empirical data on the topic, I simply do not know. I would love to know, of course, but I just don't. And I think a lot of vegans need to just admit this already. Whatever the answer is, as implied at the beginning of this video, I do think the framing around this question should not just be based on what makes people go vegan, but also keeps them vegan with good reasons to stay vegan. Obviously, 20 vegans going vegan for only 2 months and stopping because they were given really poor reasons to go vegan, and when they were challenged, they couldn't, offer up good reasons against those, challenges, is worse than 10 vegans going vegan for life because they were given these sufficient reasons to go vegan, which they can use to defend themselves or their lifestyle when challenged. So put very simply, I think we should definitely shoot for this, as more vegans with good reasons to be vegan leads to more activists with good reasons to be vegan, which leads to, more vegans that have good reasons. It's like a sort of like a snowball effect. Another aspect of vegan activism, which I think would need to be present in this hypothetical best form of vegan activism there is, would be an emphasis on health-related things that, if adhered to, will increase the likelihood of people staying vegan. For example, emphasizing the importance of B12 supplementation, or making it clear that people don't need to go fruitarian or raw vegan in order to be vegan. I can't express how many times I've come across vegans with great intentions who are ethical vegans, but who also have no idea that they should be supplementing with B12, or they've fallen down some niche vegan dietary path that need not be followed, which only increases the likelihood of negative health outcomes as a vegan, which in turn increases the likelihood of them no longer being vegan in the future. Moving on, let's now talk a little bit about this paper titled The Vegan Dilemma: Do peaceful protests worsen attitudes to veganism? This paper looked at 2 studies and explored whether pro-vegan protests that are depicted as causing social disruption without violence leads to more negative attitudes toward veganism compared to non-disruptive protests, which was considered the control of the study. Before going into the results, I think that some of the limitations and strengths of this paper should be understood. The 2 papers together had a modest sample size of 1,383 people and used exposure from real news articles depicting actual protests with limited amendments made to the original published text. This is considered significant because previous studies have relied on fictional articles written by a research team in fictional protest movements. In the second study, the use of protests unrelated to veganism as a control was also a strength, as it rules out the possibility that reading about a disruptive protest for one social movement, for example, fast fashion, may generalize negative attitudes toward a different movement, veganism. Some weaknesses of the study include differences between the articles irrespective of the disruptive nature of the protest. For example, the content and the number of quotes from activists and bystanders, the day the protest was held, and the inclusion of the number of activists. Future research may benefit from including articles written specifically for the study in order to eliminate these potential confounds. Both studies also rely largely on a sample of undergraduate psychology students. This is considered problematic because psychology students aren't considered representative of the overall population. This makes it difficult to extrapolate the results from this paper onto the average person. A purely randomized population would serve as a better population to help do this. So just elaborating further on that, higher education, higher socioeconomic status, and less conservatism are all associated with increased likelihood of adopting a meat-free diet and are likely to characterize a sample of psychology students. Now, for the findings, remember the studies analyzed examined whether reading about vegan disruptive protests led to more negative attitudes toward veganism. In study 1, there was mixed support for this hypothesis. Women, but not men, reported more negative attitudes toward vegans after reading about a disruptive protest compared with non-disruptive protests for a different movement. It should be made clear that reading about a disruptive protest and experiencing a disruptive protest are 2 different things and could potentially result in different reactions, for better or worse. In study 2, reading about any vegan protest, irrespective of whether it was disruptive or not, led to more negative attitudes toward vegans. This effect was said to be mediated by perceived immorality or similarity. In other words, reading about any vegan protest led to greater perceived immorality of the activists, which in turn reduced social identification with them, leading to more negative attitudes. Another finding in study number 2 was that reading about these vegan protests actually increased meat endorsement. Kind of like when people comment on vegan posts and say, this makes me want to eat double the meat. And this effect was independent of the participants' diet. Vegetarians, our favorites, and non-vegetarians alike demonstrated increased criticism of vegans and astonishingly increased their endorsement of meat consumption after reading about any vegan protest. One of the explanations given by the authors for this effect was based in cognitive dissonance. Straight from the paper, one possible explanation may be drawn from cognitive dissonance, i.e., the discomfort people experience due to their conflicting beliefs and behaviors. In relation to meat eating, people may hold beliefs that animals deserve to be treated with care, which conflict with their decision to eat meat. This conflict may lead to negative effect and a tarnished view of oneself as a moral person. In line with the action-based model of dissonance, meat eaters may then try to reduce this dissonance by actually increasing their commitment to their behavior. That is, by reinforcing their decision to eat meat. This explanation is in line with a body of related research showing that once people have chosen to engage in a behavior, they consequently become more motivated toward continuing that behavior. For example, this paper from 2007 found that once participants were led to believe they had killed insects in an experimental task, they were more likely to kill an increased number of insects in a subsequent task. Notably, this effect was only found among participants who reported some similarity with insects, and the subsequent killing was associated with reduced negative effect in this group. In some, there is evidence to suggest that the current findings may be explained by meat-related dissonance. That is, it is possible that when faced with articles emphasizing the benefits of veganism, participants in the current studies increased their commitment to meat eating and derogation of vegans in order to resolve dissonance between their dietary choices and their values and reduce negative effect. Another explanation was given by the authors from the perspective of terror management theory. Straight from the paper, TMT, or terror management theory, is a social psychological theory developed to explain the impact of fears of death on human behavior. Hundreds of experiments from TMT demonstrate that when mortality is made salient, such as through subtle written or visual reminders of death, people seek to defend the shared values and belief systems of their culture. For example, reminders of death have been shown to increase stereotyping of outgroup members, negative evaluations of outgroup members, and outward aggression towards people who hold opposing political beliefs. Relatedly, reminders of death have been shown to increase people's desire to see humans as distinct from animals, which may arguably bolster justification for the exploitation and consumption of animals. In line with this, there's been a growing call for TMT to be considered when attempting to promote pro-environmental behaviors. One recent review of TMT argues that common strategies for promoting eco-friendly behaviors may inadvertently increase defensiveness, warning against using, quote, mortality-laden messaging, which could trigger unintentional social psychological responses that degrade climate communication strategies. It is possible that in the current studies, the use of words such as slaughter, kill, and murder in the vegan protest articles inadvertently served as a mortality salience prime. This may have led participants in these conditions to bolster their own cultural worldviews by defending the culturally normative behavior of meat eating and becoming more critical of the vegan outgroup. However, the fact that the control article in Study 1 also repeatedly mentioned death in the context of domestic violence and yet did not lead to derogation of the vegan outgroup may allay this concern somewhat. And on the unexpected finding of even vegetarians responding with a sort of endorsement to meat after being exposed to a peaceful vegan protest, the authors say, despite these possible explanations, it remains surprising that vegetarians similarly increased their endorsement of meat consumption after reading about vegan protests. However, vegetarian attitudes to meat eating are not always as fixed as one might expect. This paper from 2019 demonstrated that 51% of self-identified vegetarians have deliberately consumed meat since going vegetarian, suggesting their justification of meat consumption may be more malleable than one might imagine. Similarly, in the current study, this subgroup included self-identified, quote, partial vegetarians, or those who do not eat red meat, but may eat chicken or fish. This also suggests less rigid attitudes to meat consumption than the term vegetarian may imply. It should also be noted that we did not examine the duration of the participants' self-reported diet. It is possible that many self-identified vegetarians had only recently adopted this diet, making their attitudes to meat more flexible. A shorter duration of the vegetarian diet is particularly likely given the young age of the student sample. Thus, further research is needed to ascertain whether this finding replicates among a group of participants who have followed a strict vegetarian diet for a longer duration, or for whom a vegetarian diet is more closely related to their identity. In other words, f*** vegetarians, as vegans say. Just kidding, maybe. So super interesting stuff here, guys. I think the authors here did a great job trying to explain these potential findings, and I don't have much to add outside of I think studies like this are a great start in getting us closer to answering the question of, which form of vegan activism is the best. The end conclusion of the study seems to just suggest that vegetarians are annoying as f*** and should probably just go f*** them. Kidding again. Here's the conclusion. Pause to read. Anyway, guys, that's the end of the video. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a more clear answer to the question posed in the title of the video. I strongly recommend you read the entire paper recently discussed. I did highlight the stronger points, but the paper in totality is very interesting. I think the general takeaway from this video is that we need more research on the topic, and vegans should be lowering their confidence in trying to answer the question of what is the best vegan activism there is. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you support my work and want to get early access to it, you can click the link in the pinned comment and support me on Patreon, and you can have one-on-one messaging access with me through there. And if you don't know, I have a book going over most, if not all, of the anti-vegan arguments you can hear online. If you want to get that as well, that'll be linked in the pinned comment. And there's also links for merch and protein powder, which if you purchase, helps support the channel. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude,
fuck off. I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,